welcome. I'm so delighted to have you, Carrie Weems, and you, Tony Kushner, here with me for the 6th Chairman's Evening, I think. If I'm not mistaken, Carrie May, you are the first guest at a Chairman's Evening who is also a MacDowell Fellow.
No.
Yes, and I think that makes it very special because now there are 2 people on the stage who know what it's like to be at the dinner table at the MacDowell Colony and sit down and maybe you don't necessarily know the person who's sitting next to you, and you start trying to feel your way into a conversation. You say, like, how long have you been here, and what is your discipline that you're working in, and all of those kinds of preliminary questions. And I'm going to start out that way with the 2 of you too, because the purpose of this Chairman's Evening is to try to give some kind of flavor of what conversation is like when you have artists working in different disciplines who have a chance to meet and talk. But before we get to that, would you just say a little bit about your time at MacDowell and what it was like for you?
Well, there's nothing like having, first of all, it's really beautiful. And I felt very honored to be there, this sort of hallowed ground where so many other artists, writers, thinkers, painters, just all these people have been there.
Do you remember what studio
And I don't remember the name of the studio that I was in, but I loved it. And the thing that I loved even more was that every day there was this basket delivered to my door so that I could just work without disruption. I appreciated that more than you'll ever know. To cook and to think about food and to think about gathering food, even when you have to, we're no longer hunter and gatherers anymore. We still have to do all that stuff, and it takes an enormous amount of time. And so not having to do that was really sort of extraordinary.
What did you work on?
I actually started working on a piece, 2 pieces. One that had a lot to do with music that I'm still kind of teasing out. But the other was a project called Blue Notes. And now that work, I think I did my residency maybe 5 years ago. And now that work is just starting to really sort of evolve. But having that time really made the work possible. And I didn't know it then. I think that the thing that's sort of amazing about doing residency, something like the MacDowell or other projects, is that you have this amazing time to simply process. And you don't always know what the work is actually going to be. You make these false proposals and hope that maybe, but really what you do and what really comes out is very different than you really ever imagine. I think that that's a part of the journey and the magic of being a deeply engaged artist, and the MacDowell gave me that, along with a couple of really wonderful memories, of people running naked through the woods and things like that.
I miss that. I always go in the winter. So that sounds pretty good, doesn't it, Tony?
No, it sounds like a nightmare. This is why I've never gone to a colony. I've heard that MacDowell is wonderful if you're going to do it, but
we'll talk about that.
No distractions, which is terrifying, that people actually take care of you and provide your needs, so you have no real excuses to get away from work.
Therefore the pressure.
Right?
What are your distractions?
The joy of escaping from what you're supposed to be doing. And I've also, the idea of being in a room full of other artists who are busy doing extraordinary things. Well, no, I know, but you have to all eat together or you show up together. And I just find that, because I would be the one who would have to lie about what I had done that day, because I'm very slow and fitful about it. So
you wouldn't be the one. There would be others.
There would be others, yeah, but I would assume that they were all telling the truth and I was lying, which is what I was doing. So I don't know, it seems...
Will you talk, like, what is your What is your work day like when you're?
I went to one colony in British Columbia for 3 days, and then I left. It was elk mating season. No, not mating season, elk calving season. So there were these giant elk called wapiti, and they had all given birth recently. So they were all in the woods with their calves, and they were, I think the shoulder height was like 6.5 feet. Wow. They were very large animals, and they were very protective of their young. And if you happened to stumble across a mother and her calf, you could really be trampled to death. So they gave everyone a garden rake with a men's white shirt hanging on it and these huge googly eyes. And if you were going to go from your cabin to the refectory, to wherever it was that we would meet and lie about what we had done that day, you had to carry this rake and walk in the woods. So there were like all these Canadian riders waving these things around like a performance piece.
Are you sure they weren't hazing you?
It might have all been an average joke, but I was there for 3 days and I thought I've had enough. Did you? Back to civilization.
No, I am, endlessly the disruptor. And so I have to say a couple of things and ask a few things because, and of course, this is like what it's like being at a table. Are
you disruptive at the table?
I mean, probably. First of all, it's really an honor to be sitting with the both of you. I mean, I've had such regard for the work that you've done. I was, reading, I think the first book that I read of yours was Final Solution.
Oh, wow.
Which I just love. And I meant to bring it today so that you could sign it for me. And then, of course, Tony's sort of significant, monumental, extraordinary breakthrough with Angels in America. Which changed what we understood to be, first of all, just thinking about what this thing was, this power was, this disease was that was wiping out half of the great artists, along with many other people in the world, over 180,000 people. Over 180,000 people died here in this country. And so, and the thing that's interesting for me is that this sort of connection with Angels in America, on the one hand, and the Final Solution on the other, and me in the middle, are deeply linked. And so that there's a kind of concern, a kind of thing, an issue, or that's at the core of the work that I think is really sort of interesting. And I'm wondering if you can talk just a little bit about the interest, like the deep interest in the work that you are actually making. What drives a piece like Angels in America or Final Solution?
Oh.
Can I dodge that by returning the
Please do.
compliment or praise that your work I told you when we just met upstairs.
I told him he had to say this in front of everybody.
Even if you hadn't. I actually was going to bring my battered copy of the
Kitchen Table
series for you to sign, and then I thought, is it actually like bad manners to ask an artist to sign a book because it's like getting your signature. Anyway, an artist's signature somehow matters more than a writer. But the work is all of your work that I've seen is so profoundly poetic and complicated and rich and political, and does such extraordinary things with narrative. I've used Kitchen Table series in playwriting classes that I've taught.
Wow! Wow! I had no idea.
And as I said upstairs, you're also a really extraordinary writer. The first time I got the book at a bookstore in London and read it like a novel. 50 times, and it's just, and so it's it's just a great.
Wow.
And an honor.
What a, I had no idea. This is the first time we've ever met. I had no idea that you knew anything at all about my work. I made no assumptions
I
about that.
told you that would happen. You're awesome. I think that there are some, when I was getting ready to talk to you guys tonight, for one thing I noticed about each of you, you were born and spent your early years in Portland, Oregon, correct? Mm-hmm. And Portland is a city I know okay. My father lives there now, and I know that for generations, Portland was an exclusionary city. They worked very hard to keep Portland as white as they possibly could.
Yeah.
And there's still a lot of lingering legacy of that now. And but you were raised in an African American family there, and you, coming from this sort of Ashkenazic Jewish background, and you were born in New York City, right? But then you moved very early to Lake Charles, Louisiana.
Right.
So, in a way, each of you are kind of.
You grew up in Louisiana.
And that your father, your parents were classical musicians, but your dad ended up owning or managing a lumber yard?
My family had a lumber company from my great-grandfather came here from Russia. And
how'd that happen? Can I just ask you that? Russia to Lake Charles?
There were two ways the Jews wound up in Louisiana. One was just the rag trade route, sort of peddling, but that wasn't with my family. Apparently, I don't know if this is true, but the Jews in Poland were allowed to do like 2 or 3 things by the Polish aristocracy in the 19th century. Make vodka. You can still buy this vodka in most Polish cities called Żyd vodka, which means Yid vodka.
Nice.
And it has this horrendous anti-Semitic caricature of this Jew on the run. But they always, any poll will tell you, oh, they made the best. It's too bad we had to get rid of them all because they made really good vodka. They could make vodka. They could be tailors and for some reason mill lumber. And Louisiana had these huge pine forests. And the only reason I think this may have been true is there are a huge number of Jewish lumber businesses in Louisiana. In fact, most of the sizable lumber businesses in Louisiana were run by Jews. So my great-grandfather wound up down there and started milling lumber.
So did you, when you were growing up, did you feel that you belonged in Lake Charles? Did you feel part of sort of the way of life of Lake Charles, Louisiana, or did you have a sense of New York as being your true home in some way that you needed to get to?
Sense. I mean, we were a very separate community in some ways, and then in other ways we were very assimilated. There were about 100 Jewish families. There was a wonderful little synagogue, and there was, Bayou Country, Louisiana is not like the rest of the South. It can be, grim and racist and horrible like everywhere else in the South, but I think the influence of the Catholic Church and the Cajun culture, which is Creole. I mean,
So it kind of mitigated.
It absolutely, I think, did. It's right above the center of the state when you get to Shreveport and those places. And it becomes very Baptist, very much like Arkansas, and it just gets tougher and angrier, and all the Klan stuff was north. It was, when I was in high school, I handed out pamphlets for McGovern at what turned out to be a Klan rally. And everybody's very nice, and they were all going to vote for McGovern because they would never vote for a Republican.
Did you have the really big Israel? I've seen pictures
I did,
of you.
yes. I had a big pro. I went to Berkeley to visit cousins in 1968, and I got a pic with a fist. And because when you were a kid, you had to put like grill cream in your hair, and you'd forget
brush it down.
It would stick out. It was such a relief to throw the tube of grill cream away and just let it go. So.
What was it like for you, and how'd you get there?
Well, they started in the Mississippi Delta, but my grandfather is, Jewish and Native American, and who, looks like you, basically. and they decided, at a certain point on my mother's side, and they decided to, one of my aunts had gone to Portland somehow with a friend, sort of exploring. They were sort of looking for a place where the family could reside, and they found Portland, and bit by bit, they called home and they said, "I think we found the place for us to live," and all of the family essentially packed up and moved to Oregon. It was kind of interesting, because my grandfather went. And then my grandmother came with a couple of the kids, right. And then my mother came with her sister and my father, and right, that was sort of like the migration to that place.
What was your experience growing up in Portland?
I love growing up there. I mean, I didn't feel any of the sort of tensions that are a part of the culture, in a way. So I was very comfortable. I was very comfortable there. But I think I've, been comfortable in the world. I'm very, very lucky because my father, who was just such a great guy, very early on, just instilled in me that I had a right. That idea that I simply had a right to be, a right to be who I was, a right to express myself, a right to go into the world, a right to question, a right to challenge. All of that was very important, and so it's sort of wrapped me in a kind of shroud of comfort. So that you see all kinds of shit in the world, and bigotries, and and you figure out ways. My project is to figure out ways to negotiate it, to deal with it, and to turn it back on itself, right? How do you rise above the nonsense, the pettiness, and get to the depths of who we are? That's the challenge of living.
Where do you think your father came by this sense that?
Well, he saw some very tough things early in his life. They were sharecroppers in the South, and my father had to steal his mother off of a plantation. I mean, it's like in the fucking 30s or something. It's insane. So so that they lived this experience, and I think my father, left the South knowing that he never wanted to go back. He never wanted to go back to Mississippi, and I think he only went back once to see his mother once. Once he left, and that was towards the very end of her life. He was very determined to be a man on his own terms, and that wasn't a place that he thought that he could do that. So I'm very grateful to him. My father was like a very complex man, but I embrace that one great gift that he's given me, and that's allowed me to move in the world, and I think to work in the world.
Well, speaking of gifts, from what I've read, you became a photographer as a result of a gift, a birthday gift. Is that really the true story of how you got started?
Yeah, it really is. I was like, living with a real jerk. He was really an awful person. But he was also really smart. Yeah, he was really smart, and and he just but he gave me this gift.
What kind of
gave me
was
a couple of gifts. It was a Nikon map, which I still have.
What made him? Do you have?
Well, he was a photographer also. Yeah, so he was involved in photography, filmmaking, interested in those things, and yes, he was a Marxist as well, and introduced me to Marxism, which was also a really important pathway and journey in my life. Yeah.
And did you just take to it like a duck to water? Or?
I did. I had been a dancer before. Or I'd been in, I knew, I had been involved with dance, but I didn't really understand the capacity of choreography, right? So I was sort of a natural dancer, that I had an understanding of the body and what the body does and what it wants to do and how to move with it and how to anchor it and play with it, and I love that.
Oh, that sounds nice.
But I didn't know choreography. I didn't know the science and the art of choreography. I didn't. And I think that if I had known that earlier, maybe I would have probably stayed with dance a little longer. But my boyfriend gave me this camera, and the moment I had it in my hands, the moment I started taking photographs, I knew exactly that it was going to be this tool, this way of moving in the world. And it was absolutely true, and I haven't put it down yet.
And Tony, you
Can I ask you?
please.
I don't even know what question I want to ask exactly, but because I've been thinking about this so much in the last, well, for a long time, but in the last 2 years especially, when we're sort of looking at our fellow citizens and wondering. I got last night watching the news coming from Wisconsin with this emulating in North Carolina from a year ago, where these people are now immediately trying to strip the governor, the newly elected Democratic governor and Secretary of State, of political power. And even though some things don't surprise me about the support for people like Trump and his ilk, I'm still kind of shocked that Americans are willing to go along with something that's so clearly, openly, unapologetically anti-democratic. And so I've just been wondering a lot about the origins of I'm sorry. I have to leave it on because I have a friend in I'm sorry.
There may be an important call.
It may be an important, I have somebody who is in a hospital, but just was your father or your mother, or your family, a political family? Because I guess what I'm asking about is it's very moving to hear you talk about your father giving you a sense of having rights and being a self-possessed citizen. I have a similar thing. I mean, when I was growing up as a gay kid, growing up Jewish in Louisiana was one thing, but growing up gay in the 60s and 70s was something else. And when I decided to come out, I've said this many times, I had a model for demanding my rights as a gay man, which was my parents' absolutely unapologetic, open embrace of their Jewishness, their rejection of anti-Semitism, and their, if somebody doesn't like you because you're Jewish, it's their problem, it's not you.
Right.
But it's so interesting that sense of self-possession in some people translates into the kind of political sensibility and something that you're famous for, which is a sort of a generosity of spirit that I think is in your art and also in your teaching and in your practice. And then in other people, it turns instead into a sense of entitlement and privilege and a desire to disidentify with people who are not. Who are powerless.
I got you, I understand.
And the fear of actually being identified. So I'm just curious as to, was it a struggle for you to go from it's interesting to use the word shroud, but a zone of comfort, a place of comfort in Portland, to being as political an artist as you are?
Is that really the question?
That's the question.
I mean, no, it's not at all. No. I mean, the thing that's really interesting to me, a couple of weeks ago, I started reading The Known World. Do you know that, the book, The Known World, right, by Edward Jones?
I feel like I recommended it here one night, like a couple years ago.
Right, by Edward Jones. And but before I started reading, it's been on my shelf for years, and my best friend keeps telling me, "Have you read it yet? Have you read it yet? Have you read it?" You know, and but I read an interview with Hilton Als in Edwards that was so sort of extraordinary. You know, this man who was so, Edwards himself, so abused, right? And so mistreated all of his life, and his family so mistreated. I mean, they were just so mistreated, right? And I'm reading this interview. This interview, I think it's probably one of the most extraordinary interviews I think I've ever read with an artist. And in one point, he was, for a period of time, one of his aunts, he had to go live with one of his aunts, who was really mean to him, who was just awful. And he writes, he says, on her deathbed, she saw the devil crawling down the wall. And she knew that she had served her master well, and he was coming to take her home.
Wow.
I was on a plane and I had to stand up. I mean, do you hear me? Right. I mean, it was just this, and there was something about, on the one hand, this sort of incredible innocence on his part, and also this profound way and simple way of simply telling the truth, of just telling the truth. And that when you're telling the truth is actually pretty simple, even when it's complicated, right? Yeah. You're simply trying to negotiate the truth. And so, in a way, for me, the question that you asked brings me back to the first question, which is, well, as artists, we all seem to be sort of very deeply connected, that we're interested in unpacking stories that in many ways are very similar. They're actually very similar. And how do you unpack them? And what is the thing then about the truth that you're most interested in conveying that is the liberator of it all? I mean, it seems to me that, you know, that if your fear is not a part really of a deeper truth, fear holds you back from the deeper truth, which is why you might be able to speak from an arrogant and privileged position, that actually has to do with the fear of holding on to everything that you know, that everything that your traditions and your privilege has taught you, right, that allows you to disconnect from the world. This is what I think is true.
And the idea of the truth, the question of the truth, and history and facts, you know, in a way, I think all three of us have done work over the years in which history or versions of history is mingled with fictional characters, or you've done works where you use, you create scenes that are kind of a construction of reality, or a reconstruction of reality, that is a kind of a fiction in a way.
Yeah.
And you've done that by blending characters that you've invented with real life people, like say Roy Cohn, for example. And I've done that in my work too. My last book, I did it a lot. And I'm just wondering, are you getting a lot of questions from people now about this whole supposed post-truth era that we're living in, and about the responsibility that artists have to the truth, and have you gotten any of those kind of questions where you're like, we're not allowed to?
Yeah, I mean, and I think the questions are legitimate sometimes. I mean, I think it's different working in traditional narrative realist. It's especially true with film. I'm very concerned about it. And
so, like, unless you don't want to name names, what's an example of a film or where the issue arises for you?
Well, every time, I mean, the two films that I've done with Spielberg, Munich and Lincoln, you know, there's I feel that, I mean, I'm very interested in history, and I like using history to, I mean, it's just a part of the way that I think about the world, and dramatizing history, the opportunity that it gives you to go to places where actual history can't go, because there are things that have been lost and have been forgotten, and to sort of resurrect the dead and get them to do something. But it depends on a kind of a sophisticated, complicated contract with your audience, that we all understand this is a work of fiction and that it can't be trusted. And theater, which is all about ceaselessly reminding you that nothing that you're watching is trustworthy.
Right.
I mean, that's the whole point of theater, is critical consciousness. Is one thing, but film is much more enveloping and much more dreamlike and much more assertive and aggressive a reality, and the means at your disposal of creating a version of history, of reality that's so compelling that it's almost inescapable, or it feels dangerous. It worries me that we teach history in film, and it's not history. So I feel like in Lincoln, I tried to be very, very accurate. I made one mistake.
Which was?
Well, and I think it's really my only mistake. Because my mistake was, I guess it's okay to say this.
I hope you will.
When I was writing it, the first 500-page draft, when we were doing the vote for the 13th Amendment, I thought, I have never been on the floor, I've never been in the balcony of the House of Representatives, and I didn't really know how the vote was called. So I, in my head, was running this roll call vote that was done alphabetically by state, which is, of course, how it goes in political conventions, but it's not how it's done on the Then after I did the first draft, and I showed it to Stephen, and we decided that we'd make the entire movie about the 13th Amendment, which I think was a really good decision. I then did a little more research, and I discovered, that's a mistake. So I said to Stephen, it wouldn't be done state by state. And he said, well, but it's much more exciting. One of the things that Stephen knows how to do better than pretty much anyone is making, while we were filming the debates in the House of Representatives, he kept calling me over and saying, who are they and what, they're what kind of Democrats and what kind of, it's the whole thing is reversed. The Republicans were the good guys and the Democrats were the bad guys. And there were right Democrats and centrist. And I, at one point, said, Stephen, I kept helping him sort through this because there were 600 people in this chamber in Richmond screaming at each other. And I said, but it is sort of chaos. I mean, the accounts where everybody was screaming. He said, yeah, but anybody can make chaos. I want to make chaos that people can understand. And which is, I think, a pretty good description of what he does. And he said, it's just going to be so much easier to follow the vote if it's not just this long chain of guys, but if it's state by state by state. And so I left it that way. And then, anyway, it was a long story. The first three votes are from Connecticut, because there were no A states, because Alabama had, of course, wasn't voting on the 13th Amendment. They were busy doing something else. They were actually seceding from the Confederacy, which is when Jefferson Davis got frantic about the fact they were running out of people, he decided that he would do something that others in the Confederacy had urged him to do all along, which was to offer to slaves their freedom if they would fight for the Confederacy. And this was opposed by many other people in the Confederacy because it was admitting that they didn't really want to be slaves, but it would be a reward to get out of slavery. And they couldn't, how could we do that? And right towards the end, he actually let it go through the Confederate legislature, and Alabama immediately announced that it was going to secede from the Confederacy, which is, of course, where the whole thing was headed. It was going to turn into this giant jumble of anarchy. Anyway, Connecticut was the first state to vote, and all three Connecticut's representatives were Democrats. They were all really lousy human beings. They had actually been bribed to vote for the amendment. We even know what they were bribed for. Stephen really wanted to start out with a no vote. We changed the names of the representatives, and I thought, oh, who cares? I'll spare you the whole thing, but in the Oscar fight, some congressman who's still there in Connecticut got hold of this and started screaming and yelling about.
Oh God.
And then, with the help of Maureen Dowd, that all got turned into this canonization of this horrendous guy, James English, who actually a year before had voted against the repeal of the Fugitive Slave Act in 1863. He was still.
Wow.
So anyway, that was my mistake. I mean, but I think it's a complicated question. I mean, I think it's very different because you're. I mean, in everything from the way. I mean, the historical photographs, the Agassiz. Is that how you pronounce it?
Agassiz.
Agassiz. That's not me.
That's not you.
It's Jeff's.
There's a very complicated relationship to historical reality, to photographic reality that you're making very complicated.
Yes, but there, but I think that these ideas though about trying to sort of dig at something that you believe to be ultimately true, that allows, first and foremost, that allows me to see the world differently, and then my audience to see the world differently. I think is the thing that I'm really sort of most interested in. Right? Can I simply figure out and posit and pose and structure a work in such a way that it leads us into asking sort of deeper questions about who we are and what we think and who we think we are as opposed to who we really are, today I was looking at, when you're working, you've worked for a long time, and I think we're just about the same age, right? You're probably older, I think.
I'm 55.
Much older. But, I realize that, that my work teaches me all these things about what I'm interested in. That it's not, that I have, yes, my ideas, I have my opinions, I have my stakes, my claims, but invariably my work tells me, if I'm paying attention to it, right, that it's sort of bigger than myself, it's larger than myself. There's this something about the unconscious that works through you that eventually you have to pay attention to. And it seems to me that a part of the best thing that we can do, when we can do it, is to get out of the way of the work so that the work can actually tell us what it is, right? And so this afternoon, I sent a photograph to somebody the other day, and I realized that, I've been using sort of notions of mirror endlessly. That I'm always holding a mirror up to something, whether it's to myself or to others or to you or to them, but it's, but constantly, and I thought, right? That this whole, that this project, that this life's work has been really this very simple gesture of holding up a self-reflective mirror. Who are we? What do we want to be? Do I like what I see? Am I living my life in the way that I thought that I would, that I wanted to? Who am I? And I think it is the simplest and the most complex question that we ask of ourselves. Have I delivered on my promise? Am I living up to my promise? Have I done this work? What am I leaving here? Have I created a pathway that maybe others can then step more easily? Right? I mean, that for me is it's certainly a tall order, but it's a thing that I'm really sort of interested in. I'm aware of the artists who've made my life easier, they've through their bodies and their skin, right, have sort of laid down for me so that I can walk more easily, right? And I think that that's pretty extraordinary, what artists do for one another, and allow us then to live more easily because of the work that they've done before.
That's an interesting thing to think about. And Tony, I'd like to ask you, like, who are the artists that you look upon as having somehow made it possible for you to do the work that you do in one way or another?
I'm so happy to meet you. You're so wonderful.
When you were talking about mirroring, I thought, because I was going to mention this in the context of historical accuracy, and as an example, I can't remember the name of the series, but it's two photographs
Of mine?
of yours. One is of there are two groups of Native Americans, and one of them.
Oh yes. From
it's like before, and it's a before.
yes.
and
Oh, so fabulous.
It's really great.
So great.
It's this. Can I describe it, or do you want to?
Yes. No, go ahead. I mean, you know,
Is it in a larger series, or is it just?
it's a part of a project that I did called the Hampton Project.
Right.
Yeah, from that series, and
It's
this before and after.
Yes.
You know, a group of Native Americans who had been taken from the Midwest and brought to Williams College or to Carlisle. I'm not really sure at the moment which university or college they went to, but they all arrived in Native dress. And Frances B. Johnston, the great photographer, female photographer, photographed them. And she photographed them before in their traditional clothing, and then she photographed them after they had been, quote, assimilated into the college system, the vocational system after the Long March. It's an extraordinary
Yeah, it's an amazing.
mirroring, reflection. Yes, it
But
is.
also, and I can't remember where I encountered it, but it's there. I mean, maybe this is not the right way to look at it, but because I knew your work, I was thinking, okay, so is this an actual daguerreotype, or is it a staging? And it made me look at the two groups, and at the expressions on the faces and the clothing, and it is this. And the print is so beautiful. So now I'm thinking I saw it in the museum. The prints are so beautiful. They're so sharp and vivid that it feels both very historical and also very immediate. And because I know your work and it's in the context of your work, and with that mirroring thing going on, it throws you into a kind of a wonderful place of confusion, where you're watching looking at something that is. Seems enormously contemporary and something completely lost to time.
Interesting. Yes.
Back and forth at the same time. And that's the part of the great theatricality, I think, in your work is the playing around. If you haven't seen it, there's a play I just moved from New York Theatre Workshop to Barrow Street, and I'm not an investor, so I can plug for it, by this actress and playwright named Heidi Schreck, called What the Constitution Means to Me.
Oh, yeah.
Has anybody seen it?
I was just hearing about it.
Really, I have to say, do not miss it. It's only up till December 30th. And it's a one-woman show, and she worked on it for 10 years. And
Wow.
you really should see it.
Okay, I will.
Because it plays with that kind of confusion so wonderfully, because it's a one-woman show, except there are two other people in it. And you don't know what's written and what's sort of being generated on the spot. And there's a weird relationship between the text of the play and the performance that is connected to what she's saying about the U.S. Constitution, about living texts. And anyway, it's really fantastic and great, and it throws you into a number of those kind of questions.
This sort of, right?
Right.
And, you know, this idea of, like, you know, when and where I enter, I have to know, like, what you're working on. Like, what are you working on? I read something today that was very interesting. I've been reading this, it's about this guy, technologist in Silicon Valley, who at the very end of this article says, I have no idea why people read history, right? When the only thing that really matters is the future.
Wow.
Yeah.
Impressive.
Yeah. So what do you think about this idea, and where are you in terms of, so that we've lived through stuff, and so now what? Now what are the projects? What's the work now?
Well,
Tony?
right now, I'm sort of embarrassed to say this for some reason. Well, West Side Story.
Oh yeah. That's pretty cool.
How's
it going?
It's going okay.
That's what you're working on now, West Side Story? For film?
Yeah.
The film version.
Spielberg wants to remake it. Well, he's remaking it. We're remaking it. He asked me about 3 years ago to do the screenplay, and we're now casting, and we go into rehearsal in February, and then
Exciting.
Filming in New York
Is
in
it set
June.
in the present day, or is it back at the time it was?
1957.
Wow.
In that area.
Wow.
It's the Jets and the Sharks and Puerto Ricans and white
guys.
street trash, which they're really supposed to be. Where I've spent a lot of time looking at the original musical as opposed to the sort of grand. I mean, the film is incredibly great. All of its mistakes notwithstanding, it's a really extraordinary thing. But they turned it into a grand opera. I mean, they add immense amount of instrumentation, and the singers all have these sort of cast iron perfect voices, and the structure is very different from the original musical, which is more complicated and I think truer to Shakespeare and more interesting. And it's smaller and tougher, and you can feel it in that way that when people are creating something that nobody else has done ever before, kind of the nervous energy. It's like, the Rite of Spring or something. It gets trapped somehow in the piece and it never goes away. It's just in there. And when you listen to that original cast album, that's what it is. It's also, it's written for kids. So, I mean, they're supposed to be teenagers,
Right.
Romeo and Juliet, and in 2018, a gang of white boys who want to rid their neighborhood of Puerto Ricans is going to bring up association. If you're in their 20s, suddenly you're in Charlottesville. So they're a problematic group, the Jets. They're not as irredeemable if they're high school kids, which is what they're supposed to. When you read Arthur Lawrence's book originally, I mean, that's what they are. They're just stupid. And in the way that teenage boys in groups especially are. And it's interesting. The Sharks are very clearly recent arrivals in New York who are part of a coherent community that's trying to establish itself. The Jets are the left behind, sort of cast aside children of previous generations of lower class white people who had all moved on and left gangsters and thugs and drug addicts behind. And so, I mean, it's not two sides of the same coin. It's an interesting thing. So, anyway, we're doing it. And,
Congratulations. I want to come to set.
Oh, please, come be in it. You can dance. It's a deal.
All right, well, I see Dean is gesturing to me.
Is it time to wrap up already?
It's probably time to move to the portion of the evening where we ask
You
for
didn't
some
answer
questions.
the question, and
I'll
you didn't
quickly.
answer your own question, so-
I'm living in the future and the past at exactly the same time.
Please. But you have to tell us just a little bit about what you're working
I'm
on,
working
please.
on
You have
a
to.
new spin-off of Star Trek. So there's already a rebooted Star Trek that's going on right now on CBS All Access. It's called Star Trek Discovery, and it's been unexpectedly popular, so they want to make more, and so I'm working on this new series in which Sir Patrick Stewart is going to return and reprise his role as Captain Picard 20 years later. And so I'm living in the future because obviously it's set in the 28th century, but I'm living in my past because I'm a lifelong Star Trek nerd, and been watching the show really faithfully since I was 10 years old, and it means a lot to me in a lot of really deep ways. So to be able to handle these sort of sacred materials,
Wonderful.
and try to do something new with them, it's been really fun.
Wow.
Congratulations.
Thank you. It's really fun. It's kind of like Sharks in the Jets. You got it.
So before we go,
Yes.
what are you working on?
Yeah. What are you working on, Carrie?
I'm doing a couple of things, but I do all these convenings with other artists. I don't know if you know about them. I've been convening other artists. I do these big conversations and talks, and I bring lots of people together. And so I'm doing a smaller one at Grace Farms in the spring. But my big project is this project that started at the Armory, the Park Avenue Armory, where I started doing a project called The Shape of Things, and sort of unpacking notions around the histories of violence and what that looks like and what it means. And so I did the first iteration of it, which was this convening in last December, which was wonderful and exciting and interesting. It was really fabulous. It was really a great day, and now I'm designing the exhibition's portrait portion of it for Drill Hall, and hopefully that's going to open in 2020. It's called Darker Matters, and sort of centers. I'm building like a 3-ring circus. It's a 3-ring circus, and sort of looking at the circus of politics and the politics of circus.
Wow.
Bringing those two things together, and I'll need your help. I'll call you.
Wow.
So that's what I'm up to.
Great.
And taking care of my husband, if he'll let me.
All right. Well, thanks a lot. I wonder if anybody out there's got a question they'd like to ask Carrie May or Tony, and I don't know about
Or Michael.
Coming right here.
Tony, the West Side Story has so many political implications today that it didn't necessarily, or maybe it did in '57 or when it first came out. Are Spielberg addressed? Is he interested in that aspect? Are you interested? I mean, you started writing it sounds like before the political era. So have you adjusted? How has that affected what you're writing?
Well, it's affected it hugely. I mean, it's an interesting. The history of the show is fascinating because when you talk to Puerto Rican activists, it's a vexed, complicated thing. There are many ways in which they felt that these 4 gay Jews that wrote West Side Story didn't exactly get it right. And then on the other hand, when one of the main tropes of literature about not just Puerto Rican but Latinx history in the United States is invisibility, is a feeling that there's this tremendous history and current reality of racism, but for many decades, it sort of would occasionally fitfully swim to the surface and then go away, and it was kind of not spoken of very much. So, seeing Cheetah Rivera on the Ed Sullivan Show singing America, which in the original it's just the girls, the boys have gone off to do the Rumble, and the girls have a political argument. It's not, Jerome Robbins is a really complicated guy. His politics are really, it's complicated. He really depoliticizes things in this very subtle way. He was also a great genius in many other ways, but he turns America from a political argument into foreplay. The greatest dance number ever filmed, probably, or that and Cool, which he moved to the end of the movie where it makes no sense. Anyway, but it's, I think I think it's really remarkable. I think it's a remarkable work of art. I think it's in a way what Carrie was saying about the unconscious moving in and that thing that happens sometimes. You're so much better as an artist as a person, as an artist, than you are as a person. And then these guys who, I mean, Stephen Sondheim has wonderful politics. He's always had them. Bernstein, God knows, did. And so did Arthur, but it's extraordinary to me how much room there is in the structure they created, in the songs they created, in the musical itself, to, without doing any violence to it, make it address certain things that it didn't address before. The fact that the neighborhood where it's filmed, where it was filmed, was the Upper West Side, and it was all being torn down to make way for Lincoln Center. So without too much difficulty, we just sort of made that a part of the film, that everybody, the Jets and the Sharks are both, I mean, the Puerto Rican community and the remnants of the white communities there are all being dispossessed by Robert Moses. And there, it's, and I think this is a great attraction for the material. It's, I think it's a sophisticated, rich, complicated piece of political material, and it's, in a profoundly, I think, valuable liberal tradition, and I think that's very much a groove to it. Plus the fact that it's the most beautiful score ever written for a musical. I mean, it just sort of is. But it has a meaning and impact, and we'll finish filming this summer, and then I think it'll come out in 2020. So I'd like to believe before the election, but I think invisibility, thanks to Donald Trump, is not, what they're having to deal with now. It's demonization, and Puerto Rico is clearly going to be a huge issue in the upcoming election because of the horrendous behavior of the Trump administration towards the island, the grotesque level of neglect and indifference and cruelty. I think that this should become a big issue. Good people should make it an issue. Certainly Donald Trump will make it an issue because he will always need, Guatemalan people applying for asylum to demonize, to motivate his deplorables to come out and vote. So anyway, I think
it's pretty political. It makes me sorry, I'm not going to bring everything back to Star Trek, but it makes me think of the original series of Star Trek in that, the legacy we read about so many women who grew up when Star Trek was new, have women scientists, women astronauts, physicists have said they were initially inspired by watching Star Trek as girls, and for African American women in particular, like the figure of Lieutenant Uhura was this incredibly significant
Wasn't
figure.
she fabulous? She was so hip.
She was amazing.
So
but then when you go back and watch the shows, like they're so problematic, to use a trendy word, but that not race so much is sort of not even really talked about. It's assumed that we solved all those problems and everything's fine. But the way women they have a place on the bridge of the starship, but their place is like to bring the captain a sandwich and like hand him a clipboard and he's signing things. So, but it was an incredibly important cultural milestone. But
he's supposed to be irresistible.
Yes.
And as a gay child, watching it, I don't get it. He's not Spock.
Spock, yes.
Who lived in a matriarchal society. Supreme or whatever her name is.
Hilarious.
Oh, you're betraying some real knowledge, Tony. This is, that was Cohane.
Cohane, yeah.
Another question?
Yes. Can you hear me? Yes. There were two questions. One, if you could all share something about your work habits and how you work on a daily basis. That's one. And the other thing I thought about was when you're doing something like West Side Story or Star Trek, I'm thinking of the stage performance versus the movie performance and the possibilities you have with film versus what's on stage. And I wondered how much you referenced back all the way in your studies of this to the stage performances.
Well, just very quickly, I mean, I can just say that, I just work every day. I just kind of get up and I work in one form or fashion every day on something that's sort of meaningful to me. And always, of course, looking for time to really, sort of tease things out, and just sort of looking for that zone of time where time almost seems to stand still and the work just starts to flow, right? But you only get there because you go to your desk every day, right? And then something happens. There's sort of like this little crack that happens, and you're able to sort of enter this sublime space where things start to feel like they're just coming. It's just coming. It's just like a wash.
How big a problem is this for you when you're working?
Actually, well, my phone is often on silence. I try not to, of course I look at email a lot, but I try not to let it worry me too much. But I am sort of interested in the same thing. And a lot of my material and ideas, they sort of flow through dreams. And so I was working on a piece called Grace Notes. It's a performance that I put together a couple of years ago. And it started really sort of centered on the killing of the Emmanuel 9 in Charleston. And one of the questions that I kept asking myself, so I called it Grace Notes, Reflections for Now. Grace Notes, Reflections for Now. And so I started writing and reading and looking at other artists and thinking about stuff and digging and sort of, in my soul storing all that shit up and trying to figure out some things and writing and pulling the visuals together and the music together and who I wanted to work, like all of the components. And I staged it and I performed it, but I still hadn't figured out, in a way, the meaning of grace. Right? Like we were on stage and I was still asking myself actually what it was. What does that mean? And so the second iteration, I decided that I would call a bunch of people and I would ask them to provide me with their meaning of grace. And so I did. I called about 30 people and asked them. But the most interesting response actually came from my mother. Blew my mind. She talked about, so I called her up and she said, "Hey, baby." I said, "Mom, tell me, what does grace mean to you? What does that mean?" And she said, "Well, it has a lot to do with charity. And has a lot to do with compassion and the ability to offer all of that, regardless of what's happening to you, to offer that generosity of spirit back to somebody else." I think that's what it means. And we went on to have a conversation that lasted for about 40 minutes. My mother just really digging into this, and I recorded the whole thing. It's fabulous. It's really interesting. This idea about our parents, where we come from, continues to fascinate me. I never thought that I was like my mother. I thought I was more like my father, right? But my mother, who still lives, has really taught me a great deal. And then, still in the process of working this through, and I sort of brought in, I actually used my mother's voice in the performance. The ringing, the dialing, talking to her, and used that in the performance. And then I was still struggling, right, with another part of the work. And I just have to say this. And so it was an August night, and I was just really struggling to work, like really trying to get on top of the work and to control it in some sort of way and to make its essence felt profoundly and deeply and truly. And so I went to sleep on an August night, and I dreamt that I was standing at the seashore. And there was this gigantic wave, this massive thing that was rising up out of the sea, this huge tsunami that was coming. And I saw this thing coming and I thought, oh my, I have to tell my friends, I have to warn my friends, I have to try to save myself and them too. And I'm running and I started to run and I looked towards my right and there was Donald Trump leering at me in my dream. I thought, what's he doing here? What's he doing here? And I run and I'm screaming and I'm yelling that this tsunami, this force that is threatening to destroy us all is coming. And then I arrive at Martin Puryear's great ladder. I don't know if you've ever seen it. Do you know Martin Puryear, the sculptor? This fabulous ladder that, starts and just goes, just infinitely into space. And all of my friends were on the ladder. And as they climbed, they were singing, "We are climbing Jacob's ladder." But not as a hymn, it was like as a protest song. And it was, and I woke up out of this dream and I ran out of my room and it was sort of like there. It was there it was, right? That is what you are kind of up against. And how do we make a piece? How do I make a piece that really gets to the moment that we are living and the challenges that we face, and that there is a massive tsunami that is coming, and that somehow we have to move to a higher ground, and finding that space to work that out in my dreams and in my waking hours is my biggest project.
That is amazing.
Beautiful.
Did you see Ariane Minushkin at the Armory, her piece last year, Hotel?
Oh my God.
Which was sort of, in a way, about that question that you just asked. It's a
Extraordinary.
nightmare play about being stuck with a theater company in India and having to make a piece that justifies a big grant that she's gotten, that also can explain the world at this particular moment of terribleness with the tsunami rising up, and the impossibility of doing that and the absolute necessity of doing it, working simultaneously, and then ending. I was just completely blown away with the speech at the end of The Great Dictator, Charlie Chaplin's speech, which a lot of people, I have to say, me included, you're always a little bit cringe when you hear him do it, because he's not a good voice actor, and it feels a little purpley, or at least that's the way I remembered it. And this guy gets up and delivers it at the end of that thing, just everybody was sobbing, because it turns out to be one of those beautiful things ever written, and very hopeful, and very true, and it was just, I thought of that when I was listening. Can I just ask you a question?
And then how did you?
Oh,
Then they were out.
I can also wait and answer the question.
Please do.
Okay, Lee.
I was just wondering, though, when you're doing a performance like Grace Notes and you feel in the first iteration that you haven't found it yet,
Yes.
for me, that anxiety
Yes, it's
becomes
true.
very counterproductive and becomes the great enemy of work for me. I
was wondering about that, yeah.
Absolutely true.
Yeah.
It's like aerobic exercise. If you do it every day, you'll always be able to do it, and it'll be there once you're doing it. The great mistake is to run away from it. The anxiety of having a great subject like the nature of grace, and feeling that you have other good stuff in it, but you haven't found that, is to me a source of great terror. And I'm just curious about if it's terror then, or does it just become easily sort of part of the?
No, I mean, I think it was very difficult, and it was upsetting, and yes, it was a lot of anxiety and a lot of questioning, and I knew that it's sort of like knowing that where the weaknesses are, and knowing that it's got to get fixed, and you've got to fix it somehow. You just got to hang in there and try to figure it out, and do the battle. Just do do the work. I mean, I was sort of wondering about, the same thing about, again, just the two of you before we end, and we'll end on this note. I mean, you've both been like extraordinarily prolific, and when you look back, are there moments when you think, I could have been better? That like that should have been better. I mean, it's the same thing, right? That if you were writing Angels in America today, there would be something else would probably happen. Right?
You're
Right.
kind of notorious tinkerer.
I
Right, you're right.
rewrote large parts of it for the most recent Broadway iteration of it.
Right? How did that feel? I mean, was that sort of cathartic or painful?
Fun. I mean, because...
Well, you love what you do. You really love what you do.
Do I?
Do you? Do you?
I don't. I don't know. But I mean, it's a longer, more complicated, and I'd love to hear
We'll have
your
you come
answer on
back
that.
for part 2. We can come back.
Well, yes, we'll see you next year.
Okay. Thank you all very much.
Thank you.